Oi, oi, it's your boy, Slacky Giuseppe. This is the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday, the 1st of March, which snuck up on me because I thought I had a couple more days till the end of the month, but apparently it's February, and Februaries are often, actually almost always, shorter than other months. You catch me crestfallen after a weekend of pretty bad fights, if I'm honest. There was some good stuff. We're going to talk about the good stuff. And we'll probably have a bit of a moan about the bad stuff just to pad out time. But, yeah, if you watched this one, you know, it was a slog. And the real sad thing is that a lot of it was indicated like it wouldn't be. You know, it's a tricky thing because I always get into talking about like what makes a good fight, and if you could do that reliably, well, I mean, you can do that fairly reliably, and you can try and match people up well to make those sort of fights, but it doesn't always play out, obviously, as this card is a living testament. But there are a lot of ways that a fight can be good. I always say that once you got a recognizable. Well, not even a narrative, but like swings in momentum really help make an exciting fight. But then I can name tons of fights that are fairly one-way traffic, but you get into rooting for the guy who's just fighting through. I mean, even this Rivera versus Munhoz fight, it was mainly one-way traffic. It was, they were kicking the shit out of each other, but it was fairly obvious from early on that Munhoz was taking control, and he was still excited and enjoying it, and it was a good fight. So then I get to thinking, is it swings of momentum tend to result from adaptations made by both men. That really does help a good fight. Like if one guy's having success and then the other guy makes an adjustment and suddenly he's the first guy's thing isn't working and the other guy's getting back into it. Those are really good fights. But you can have good fights where guys just bang one idea against the wall and alternately it works and it doesn't. We always talk about like the jab versus counterpunching and how if you get stuck on the end of the jab, that's a nightmare. But if you're jabbing and missing, that's also a nightmare for you because you're getting the counterpunches. And I was thinking that a lot during the Krylov versus Ankalaev fight because they were doing the same thing over and over and over, and it was just sort of changing which one was coming out on top. But then that was a bad fight. So lots of garbage on this card, but we're going to talk mainly about the main event because that was the thing that I got excited about before the fight. And I announced this on Twitter, but I'm now doing a pivot from you've got to watch this Cyril Gane guy, he's never had a bad fight, to you've got to watch this Cyril Gane guy, he's incredibly well rounded. It's I think it was overplayed how bad this fight was. I thought Cyril Gane looked really good. I thought he looked a bit tentative, not even tentative, because he didn't look scared at any point. He was just very measured. Like, he was very aware of the kind of counterpuncher he was dealing with, or the power of counterpuncher that he's dealing with. But we talked about this before the fight. I said, I think I said, you should go southpaw and just shut down his lead hand for the whole fight. Anytime he was southpaw, Jairzinho Rozenstruik was just useless. Like, if you shut down his lead hand, he doesn't have anything. And if you're not really opening up and offering him counter opportunities, he won't push back and make them for himself, which was that was the main feature of this fight. Gane wasn't doing tons of damage. He was landing the odd good shot. He was landing lots of little flicking jabs and push kicks to the body and the odd low kick. But he wasn't biting off huge chunks of Rozenstruik. And Rozenstruik was just like, oh, there'll be an opportunity to counter eventually. But I thought this was going to be a fight where Gane's jab, particularly if he went southpaw and he tried to occupy the lead hand, I thought his jab wouldn't be as much of a factor. And his jab actually looked sharper than ever, which is very exciting because he's got like an 80-inch reach, 82-inch reach, and he can actually jab. John Jones has an 84-inch reach and uses his length wonderfully, but not to jab. He just kicks and frames off people's faces. And the interesting thing with Cyril Gane is always like, he started out in Muay Thai, and he had this very high stance and these inside low kicks and the odd jab and lots of knees. But then he switched to MMA, and then he got this long stance. He started stance switching, and he was looking like a point karate guy. And then he started adding the jab, which again isn't a huge weapon. Well, I mean, it's a weapon in point fighting, but you don't like pile up points. You don't like do attritive damage with it. But you still get a lot of Cyril Gane's best work being more sort of Muay Thai stuff, the stuff he was doing in his Muay Thai career. Like the knees, I mean, I put up a thread on Twitter of stepping knees by Cyril Gane, or intercepting knees, or jumping knees, or whatever. But he does really well, like faking a kick and entering with just like stepping in and grabbing a collar tie and a bicep tie, and then hitting knees. But the one that really surprised me in this fight was his push kick, his lead leg, teep neb, whatever you want to call it. Standing southpaw. He was hand fighting with Rozenstruik, and he was also flicking out the odd jab. But he was using off quite like a longish bouncing stance. He was still picking up his lead leg and push kicking into the gut. And it seemed to really annoy Rozenstruik. And I think it worked particularly well because if you're engaged in the hand fight, that little window underneath your elbow is open. And by using that push kick, you can get them to bring that elbow in, leave the hand fight a little, and start flicking the jab up the centre again. And he played those two off each other really quite well. You saw the odd sort of power kick. There was a nice middle kick in the first or second round, but Rozenstruik did a really good job. Like the moment the kick came in, he parried it across and came back and tried to get in with the left hook, and he almost closed the distance on Gane. It was probably his best moment of the fight, if I'm honest. But I remember that from the Overeem fight, and I thought, I haven't watched any of Rozenstruik's kickboxing career. I know he knocked out Benjamin Adegbuyi, who is a very good heavyweight kickboxer. But I had figured when I watched him against Overeem that probably a lot of what he did was get in off kicks and try and hit people in the head with punches. Could be entirely wrong, but it does seem to be something that he's pretty mechanically good at. Like when you see him do it, it looks like it's really well practiced. Otherwise, he basically limited himself to the odd step-up kick to the lead leg, particularly when Gane was southpaw. There was a nice one that worked when he threw a big right hand and ran up into the kick, which is something that Dustin Poirier does a lot. Like if you know the guy's going to give ground, if he's got a really long floaty stance, stuff like that, you throw punches to get him moving back, and then you run up into the kick, because then you're using a very long technique to get a lead on and hit the last thing that leaves your range of your striking range, rather. Which I suspect we'll talk about a lot when I write the tactical guide to Jan Blachowicz versus Israel Adesanya. But otherwise, he was only really like slapping with that kick. It didn't, for a guy as big and powerful as he is, it didn't look like a real troublesome kick. And there are guys who do real damage with just quick step-up lead leg kicks. Southpaw versus orthodox, or orthodox versus southpaw. A couple of really good examples are Jerome Labana, who was, he was a brick shithouse, which helps, but he did a lot of really good work as a southpaw, stepping up into right low kicks to the outside of his opponent's lead leg. And he had a really nice way of doing it where he'd basically march up into them. And there was a bit of a telegraph on it, but when guys started picking up their lead leg to deal with it, he'd do a little cross step as if to step up and do the kick, and he'd step through instead and throw an overhand left. And I think he knocked out Francisco Filho like that. That's a good example of a traditional height low kick off the lead leg being really useful as a point scoring and damaging weapon. But in the UFC, Arnold Allen does a great job calf kicking with his lead leg, which is quite rare. You don't see an awful lot of that done well. Takes that little T-step and then he brings his leg through, like whips it through at almost ankle height. But he can do some real damage with it. But I don't even think that was necessary in this fight. I think what he needed to do was get Gane moving back, step up, and just tap the lead foot across himself so that he could get in with some punches afterwards. We're always talking about this with Stephen Thompson. Anyone who does that like long retreat, if you can get a little tap on their ankle just to knock it offline as they're gliding back, you give yourself a chance to get in with punches, because you're going to ruin their balance and ruin where their feet are supposed to be. And that lead leg is so light because their hips are back, and they've got that long stance with their hips in the middle. They're not very heavy on their lead leg. And of course, backing off people very rarely heavy on their lead leg when they're retreating anyway. There was a lot of wrestling from Gane in this one, which was decent. He took down Rozenstruik. Rozenstruik was able to defend himself quite well and get back up. He didn't seem to be in too much trouble at too many points. But yeah, that was basically the gist of the fight. It was kind of limited in the action that was going on. You'd see the odd cool thing, like Gane would throw a kick and then later he'd pick his leg up to throw the kick and then step through with an overhand with the opposite hand or something like that. And his jab looked good and the front kick looked good. And the whole time I was thinking this guy could be a horrible matchup for John Jones at heavyweight if that goes, if these two end up meeting each other. I think he's a really nasty matchup on the feet, just because he manages the range so well. You know, we saw with the first Gustafsson fight, just the difficulty that having someone the same height as him gave Jon Jones. Not having that enormous reach and height advantage, and then double that up with someone who, unlike Gustafsson, can actually use their reach and range well. Plus the fact that Cyril Gane is not just like a big skinny guy, he's a fucking brick shithouse. And immediately after this, the forums were full of posts like, yes, Cyril Gane is an A+ athlete, and so on. And I said it way back when he was like the TKO champion, but how much I would give to have seen those sparring sessions at what is it, Fight Factory in Paris, or MMA Factory, the place where he and Francis Ngannou were training. You got to think they're going to meet up down the line, and that'll be fucking great, to be honest. But in terms of like what is next for both of these men, I mean, it's not too bad for Rozenstruik, even though like it was a very unimpressive performance. It was just like the Overeem one. It was like, if people aren't going to run onto you chin first, and are you not going to do anything? Like that's a killer as a fighter. You know, you can't. It basically means that anyone who agrees to fight you can get a boring fight out of you if they just don't lead and possibly win it. You know, but I think with Gane and Rozenstruik, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't have much difference in their career paths for the next like year or so. And the reason that I say that is because the UFC heavyweight title has become what the boxing heavyweight title was, where it only gets fought for once a year. And you've got Stipe versus Ngannou coming up in, is it like September or something? And then, you know, that'll be 6 months, maybe even a year before the next, or probably the best part of a year before the next title fight. And we're expecting that to be Jon Jones. So you got these guys like Cyril Gane, Tom Aspinall coming up. Volkov is in a good spot, but there's going to be a lot of people fighting each other before anyone gets a title shot now. You know, it's anyone who performs well in the next like 3 months, 6 months ultimately doesn't matter, because they've got to. It's going to be what people are doing in 9 months that really matters to who gets the next title shot after Jon Jones. Actually, they just announced that they're doing, or actually I think it was Masvidal announced this, so don't take it too seriously, but announced that they're doing the Kamaru Usman rematch in September. And you're like, oh great, a shit fight that we've already seen, and you're going to make us wait till September for it. Brilliant. I mean, what would be the harm in just having Wonderboy Thompson fight Kamaru Usman? Because you've got a compelling style matchup. You know, he's on a decent pair of... Is it pair? 3? Can't remember. He's got a couple of good wins back-to-back now. He's got the win over Masvidal, which I have no doubt he could do again, like on a day's notice. He's got like a 90% takedown defense rate in the UFC. I think maybe Matt Brown got him off his feet. Oh, and yeah, Woodley got him down off a low kick at one point. But, you know, got really good takedown defense and a really interesting striking style. And the problem is always, how do you stay off the fence? Wonderboy Thompson is a very good fighter at knowing where the fence is and staying off it. So you could give it like the whole, oh, he hasn't earned it, blah, blah, blah. But Kamaru Usman has beaten like half the top 10. And one of them is Jorge Masvidal. And Jorge Masvidal has beaten none of the top 10. So it's just a bizarre fight. I mean, it's not bizarre. They're counting on you being stupid. Or, you know, the majority of the fan base being stupid. Or rather, people who casually care about MMA being stupid enough to be like, oh, Jorge Masvidal's getting another shot. This time, he'll flying knee him in the first round. Come back and tell me if he does in 6 months' time. You could be like, egg on your face, Jack. First round, running knee, blah, blah. So we'll do co-main event, and then we'll do, like, the good fight, and then we'll do the rest of the card. Co-main event was Magomed Ankalaev versus Nikita Krylov, and this was just the same pattern playing out 100 times, or the same exchange playing out 100 times, with each man landing alternately, basically. Magomed Ankalaev immediately took the center of the cage. He's fighting southpaw. Krylov's fighting orthodox. And Krylov is, with his back to the fence, running around, throwing right high kick to right straight, over and over and over again. The old Machida special. And Ankalaev is picking up his lead leg to do a cross check and counter right hook over and over and over again. And it happened about 50 times in the course of this fight, with both men landing their punch and missing their punch in various instances. But it was a unanimous decision for Ankalaev, and it basically, like, it was a 2-1 decision, I think it was. Nikita Krylov won the first round by moving and kicking lots, and he hit a nice little standing back take off, back body lock take off a kick very early on. And he tried that throughout the fight, but He blew it by... He was on the fence, he's circling, and then he decides to do the slowest back kick you've seen since Vinicius Moreira, fellow light heavyweight, and it was crap. It was just an awful back kick. Like, he didn't time the guy coming in right, and even if he had, his leg was swinging around, so it was like a wheel kick at kidney height. And Ankalaev just stepped in on his back and took him down, and ended up on top, and just stayed there for the rest of the round. Then all he had to do was win the last round, and he'd won the fight. Krylov threw away that second round. But then that's Nikita Krylov in a nutshell. I mean, like, his last fight was just that terrible slog against Johnny Walker. But yes, we were saying, how could this fight be better? Actually, in fairness, this fight wasn't as bad as some of the fights on the card. I thought it was all right. I enjoyed it. I think the thing that really did it for me, I watched this fight last, I think, and I turned the sound off, and it was much, much better. Because just every booth on earth right now has decided that it's a podcast. It's so fucking bad. And I love Paul Felder and Michael Bisping and John Anik. I think they're all great guys. I have enjoyed their previous commentary work. But over the last year, there seems to be no one saying, okay, back on topic, lads, in their ear. And they're just going off on these... Like, Paul Felder seems like he's waiting for someone to chime in like Brendan Schaub and be like, you're pretty good at this. You should do comedy. It's terrible. And unfortunately, most of the commentators follow me on Twitter, so they see me moaning about commentary. But, I have enormous respect for them, and I think they do a very good job. But, the Rogan and DC booth in whatever the last card they did together, where they're just shouting, oh, alternately over each other. I understand people being like, well, what would you do with these fights? You've got to talk about something, and there's nothing going on. But they were as distracted and just talking bollocks in the Rivera Munhoz fight as they were in any of the others. Rivera and Munhoz are having a banger. There is such a complete change of dynamic from their first fight. Tons of new stuff going on, and they're talking about how much they love New Zealand. It really was just atrocious. But it was just... I mean, maybe people love that, but it was doing my fucking head in. So I'm watching the next few on mute, I think. Because for every laugh I get out of Michael Bisping thinking that the USSR is still a place, I get distracted by their bollocks during a fight that I'm trying to watch and study. And I say it again, but it's like they looked at the Bellator booth, which everyone fucking hates, and they were like, oh, we need some of that. But anyway, the good fight. Pedro Munoz versus Jimmie Rivera. We previewed this last episode because I was like, that stands to be a good fight. I was really impressed by Pedro Munoz because I did a big deep dive on him for the Patreon boys before the Edgar fight, and he's kind of an odd fighter because he has a very, very high work rate, but doesn't really throw more than one strike at a time. And by that I mean he will throw 2, 3, 4 strikes in like a little cluster of action as he's following someone around the cage, but not from like the same position, or not from like the same, not in a row is what I mean. So like an example from that Edgar fight, he's following around the ring, hits him with a jab, follows him a little bit, hits him with the jab, follows him a little bit, hits him with the jab, follows him a little bit, low kick, follows him a little bit, front kick, follows him a little bit, and he's constantly putting out action. It's just he's not doing 2s and 3s, and it's really noticeable with his jab because he's got a really good jab. I notice when people have really good jabs in MMA because they're still not that common, and he's got a really good jab, but almost never follows in with the right hand off it. It's just out there as a point scorer. And the other one, like, he's got a fantastic counter right hook, or overhand right, or whatever you want to call it. But like he timed Cody Garbrandt absolutely beautifully. That is an excellent fight because not only like he uses the calf kick, but more than anything, he's working on where Cody Garbrandt's feet are. Because if you like focus on trying to slip Cody Garbrandt's hands, you are going to die. He's a very, very fast guy, but he still has to step. If you establish that bigger distance, he has to step to get you. And what Munoz was doing was making this big distance and either countering him with the calf kick as he came in, or countering by dipping and swinging over the top as he came in. But when he does that big counter, and all his big counters, he sort of throws himself out of position because he's a huge hitter, but he loads up to do it. And he throws himself out of position, so he never really throws like 2 or 3 punches in a row. Until, again, no, what I'm saying is I was really impressed on Saturday night by a lot of the combination work he was doing. He's been calf kicking for ages. In fact, when he came to the UFC, he basically only had grappling and a low kick, and the low kick was to the thigh. If you watch his first fights, it's really weird because he's low kicking tons and like waiting for the opponent to grab it, and then tries to guillotine them when they do. It's a really strange strategy, and obviously he's rounded out his game since then. But that was basically all he seemed to do back then. But since then, he's added the low kick. He started front kicking and using more variety in his kicks. But the low kick is beautiful because it gives him a little bit more range. When you're kicking into the thigh, you're basically putting yourself on top of the opponent and letting them catch the leg. When you're kicking the low kick, you're kicking a little bit further out, and you've got time to get your foot back to the ground if they try and stumble in off it. So what you saw in this one was he's coming down off the low kick, throwing a counter left hook as Rivera comes back in, and then punching off that even more. And I thought that was terrific. And this was such a contrast with their first fight, because their first fight, Jimmie Rivera would, he'd take a low kick or whatever. I don't think the calf kicks were as much a thing back then. But he'd take a low kick and then he'd throw 4 or 5 punches, and Munhoz would go double forearms guard and just cover up. And he'd throw maybe one good counter back, but basically Jimmie Rivera was able to handcuff him by keeping him in his guard and throwing 4, 5, 6 punches. And Rivera was doing a really good job of ending his combinations with left kicks in that fight too, like he'd go head kick or body kick. Used the inside low kick to set up the uppercut a lot of times in that fight. But in this one, Pedro Munoz was doing a great job of circling out, coming back with counters, kicking his lead leg out, like just making it impossible for Jimmie Rivera to get going in 2s and 3s and 4s. And obviously the calf kick took effect very early. What else was there? Oh, there was a gorgeous... Munoz's ground game has always been awesome. Like there's a great guillotine he hits in one of his early UFC fights where he's on the guy's back. He's got one hook in, and the guy, like, he sort of half-heartedly starts falling off the guy, and the guy goes, "Oh, I'm out here," and starts to stand up, and Rivera swings around into a guillotine. You know, he wouldn't have been able to do it if he had both hooks in, but he can swing back, get the guillotine, and be in like a half guard, and finishes him like that. It's fantastic. I think he uses the S grip for his guillotines too. So, a fucked up wrist boy after my own heart. But in this one, Rivera took him down and he immediately elevated him with the butterfly hook and rolled through into the saddle, or the 411, or the honey hole, or the inside. Is it inside Ashy? Cross Ashy? Whatever it is. But that nasty position, the saddle, where you attack the inside heel hook. And it was really nice. And then they ended up in the 50-50. But just that elevation into the legs, it's something that Charles Oliveira is doing constantly now. And it has tremendous value as a sweep. I think people look at it and go, "Oh, leg attack." But the leg attack is important as like a thing to concern the guy. But most importantly, to attack the legs, you have to get them off their feet. And you can see this in the Worlds, the Nogi, IBJJF Nogi Worlds, the year that Gordon Ryan rocked up. And he'd won ADCC and everyone was like, "Yeah, but how will he do without the leg locks?" And basically, he checked with the refs beforehand and was like, "Am I allowed to use the saddle if I don't attack the leg?" And they all went, "Okay." And so he just put people in the saddle from the bottom, used it to sweep, came up on top and started guard passing. But the calf kick was the talk of the town, because there were a few fights where the calf kick was a huge deal, like Lawrence versus, is it Cachera? And I was going to say, the first fight on the card, there was a lot of calf kicking, but a lot of failed calf kicking. But genuinely saw some should we ban the calf kick takes on this. And there was a kickboxer, a guy who competed in like K1 Max back in the day and Rise. I can't remember his name, Rin something or other. But he came out and was like, "Yeah, too many people are calf kicking now in kickboxing. It's ruined it. We should ban it." I was like, I've seen one calf kick knockout in kickboxing because, and I'm not watching all the Rise events, but I do. People will tell you when there's a calf kick knockout in kickboxing because it's kind of egg on your face, because a lot of these people who love kickboxing are like, calf kicks wouldn't work in kickboxing. Now, I am not saying the calf kick would ruin kickboxing. I'm saying that there exists plenty of defenses for the calf kick, and if you try and calf kick someone in Lumpini Stadium, it's not going to work. Probably, I say that because there will be some Muay Thai fight stopped at some point by calf kicks, but for the most part, if you're fighting light on the lead leg and you're pulling your leg back from low kicks, you're probably not going to get calf kicked to a stoppage. The entire reason the calf kick works so well in the modern UFC is because guys are standing in longer stances and trying to box. The better the boxing gets, the more the calf kick seems to affect people. And particularly the calf kick as a counter, which we talked about with Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier the other week. Jim Miller did it to Dustin Poirier. Volkanovski did it to Max Holloway. Moicano did it to Calvin Cater, though he also did a lot of inside low kicking. But just waiting for the opponent to step in with their lead foot because they're going to come in jabbing and punting their lead leg. And there's this eternal debate between whether you can actually check a calf kick, because Jose Aldo did. He did against, I think it was Moicano. He stands in a short stance and he pulls his foot back at like the knee, basically just bends the knee, points the leg out, and the calf kick just comes in and glides underneath, basically. The issue is that one of the points of the calf kick is that you're not going to hit the hardest part of the shin. Basically, there's no way when you check a low kick to the thigh, you pick your leg up. The nastiest part of your leg to kick, the bit just under your kneecap, the shin at the very top, is the part that comes up into the kick. And you also, if you're good at it, you put the shin out into the kick. You don't pick your shin up and wait for the kick to come into it. You put it into the path of the kick. You try and cut it off earlier. When you calf kick, the opponent picks their leg up, and all that happens is you clatter through at like ankle lower shin height. So if you watch like Gilbert Melendez versus Jeremy Stevens, he keeps standing on one leg to check and getting his ankle is just slapped about by this kick, just hacked at while it's in the air. So there's a lot of guys, and I think this is what Ludwig teaches, there's a lot of guys who try this, point the lead foot out so that you're taking it on the front of the shin rather than the side of the lower leg, the calf. That would be what we're talking about. But you try and point it out into it and step into punch, which is basically trying to take the existing MMA answer to the low kick, the traditional low kick, and extrapolate to use it as a counter to the calf kick. It has worked occasionally. The problem that you run into is that a lot of guys, in the course of turning their foot out, they turn on the ball of the foot, so the ball of the foot's the only thing on the floor. So when the kick comes in, the leg just slides out. So they take the kick on the front of the shin, and the leg goes out from underneath them, which is what happened to Jimmie Rivera a lot of times in this fight. He was trying to point his shin out and step in, but basically his leg would bend at the knee, and his foot would slide out each time it was kicked. If we're talking reliable stopping of the calf kick, 1, pull your leg back. the probably the number one defense you will see in Muay Thai, if you watch a good Muay Thai fight between two good kickers, if they are trying to like inside low kick, outside low kick, most of the time they will do that thing where they just throw their hips back and pull their lead leg in. And often they throw their arms out and go, hey! But the point is, retract the lead leg. It's so useful. And it's honestly something that you'd expect MMA fighters to be better at, because a lot of people, when they try to square up to stop a shot, a takedown attempt, they retract their lead leg to do it. Number 2 is pick your leg up to check in a way that tucks your landing gear underneath you. Like I said with Aldo, bring your heel up to the opposite knee, basically. But the way that it's actually going to be stopped, and the way that the calf kick stops being the game-breaking technique that it is at the moment, is using false entries. You've got to convince the guy you're going to step in, and then don't. Because while you're working from a slightly longer distance than the traditional low kick, so you feel a little bit safer, when dudes miss the calf kick, they still spin themselves all the way around, or they have to get back to their stance, having thrown themselves out of position. Loads of great examples of this, but very first fight of the night, what was his name? Maxime Grishin comes in against Dustin Jacoby, and Jacoby won the decision, but Jacoby came back from glory and was like, I've worked this out. Dudes can't take the calf kick. Wins his first fight in the UFC by low kicks. Maxime Grishin just comes in, picks up the leg or pulls the leg back, and fakes a step in. Jacoby is fighting on the back foot, throws the low kick, misses, and then Grishin tries to come in after that. But other great examples like Mehmet Taisimov was giving Diego Ferreira hell with the calf kick, and Diego Ferreira went between picking up his lead leg from both stances. So like sometimes he'd pick up his back leg and come in with that as his lead leg, but just picking up the leg and stepping in with the leg high. Sometimes we call it a Toby Comey or a fake teep or whatever, but just pick your knee up and then slide into boxing range. It's really simple, but you don't see enough guys do it. And I think that's partly because so few guys use the teep. They think, like, why would someone buy that fake? But Diego Ferreira doesn't use the teep. He still uses the picking up of the knee to get in, though. Basically, the change in that fight came when Diego Ferreira worked out false entries. He went to step in and he stopped himself short, and Mehmet Taisimov kicked straight through, threw himself out of position, and Ferreira went, oh, fuck, I'll have that, and moved in and pressured him. And then suddenly, that technique that was breaking the pressure becomes like, oh, if I throw it and miss, I'm going to be in an even worse position while this guy's coming in on me. Tons of examples of good false entries in kickboxing. Tiffany Van Soest is a fantastic example. Who was the French lass? She had like a trilogy of fights with her in Glory. I can't remember her name now. Sorry, disrespect to her by accident. But yeah, they had 3 good fights. But throughout that, Tiffany Van Soest is going from short stance to step into long stance. So you start with your feet almost level, you step into your stance before you go. You've added a preliminary step, which would be a bad thing if you were worried about telegraphing. But in this instance, you want to telegraph. So you're starting from a shorter stance, you step in as if you're about to start stepping in from your start. You know, you lengthen your stance as if you're about to initiate an entry, and then you pull yourself back, and the opponent kicks at where your leg was or was going to be, and misses completely, and then you move in after. That bouncing in and out of stance. Rose Namajunas does it loads. She did it against Joanna Jędrzejczyk in their first fight. I mean, she had a lot of trouble with leg kicks in their second fight later on, but in that first fight, she's doing this like bounce from short stance to long stance, just her lead leg and hip. So it looks really weird. She's just like throwing her lead hip at her. But she does it. Joanna throws a low kick. I think it was just a traditional low kick, but the leg's nowhere to be found, like once the kick started. And then Rose came back with a counter combination. Ilias Enahachi, not in a great spot with kickboxing fans right now because he won a controversial decision over Superlek at the weekend, but very good at false entries. Less to draw out low kicks, but he does it every time he's got someone. If he knocks someone down, they know he's going to come straight at them. So what he does is as soon as the referee moves apart and says fight, he fakes his entry, steps off to the side, and then comes in on them while they're covering up facing where he was. False entries, number one thing that MMA fighters need to use to deal with calf kicks. I mean, there are other stuff like, if you watch, basically, someone said this on Twitter and I thought they were completely on the money because this was in response to someone being like, should we ban calf kicks? But this person said this is the same shit we were talking about with oblique kicks and low line side kicks in 2014. Did they go away? No. Have people got better at dealing with them? Yes. Maybe the calf kick stole some of the thunder, so guys do that instead of straight line kicking to the knee now. But that was another one where false entries was a huge deal. If you watch Assunção versus Dillashaw too, Rafael Assunção has worked out that he can slow TJ Dillashaw down by trying to sidekick him in the knee each time he enters. So TJ Dillashaw fakes an entry, switches legs and comes in on the other leg while Assunção's kicking with the sidekick and just batters him. And there are other ones where like Dillashaw just he reaches down as Assunção is throwing the sidekick and just slaps it offline and comes in with punches anyway. The thing is that people treat, because it is working so well as a debilitating technique right now, people go, well, there's no way to deal with it. When in fact there are a lot of ways to deal with it. And it basically, the reason that this is working so well and the reason that oblique kicks work so well was that people feel this need to get on offense. And it is important. Guys are winning. Like the best fighters in the world right now are people who take the initiative and push the pace. But if you're just lumbering forward at someone over and over again, they know exactly where your lead leg is going to be. They can put a lead on you. They can just keep timing you. It's exactly what happened to Vitor Belfort and Rampage Jackson against John Jones. They were incredibly dangerous, but they're only ever going to come in on a straight line. They're never going to like low kick and come in off that. They're never going to break your balance first. They're never going to turn you and then come in. They're always just going to come in on a straight line. And if they do, you know exactly where their lead foot's going to be. Especially if they never change stance, you know exactly where their lead foot's going to be. And changing stances is a legitimate answer to the calf kick too. You see some guys using that shin-on-shin kick, which is horrible. Cub Swanson being one. Oh, Dan Hooker did to Dustin Poirier as well. But switching to southpaw and working from there more, always a great shout. I think every MMA fighter should have some stuff from their off stance anyway. And with anything where you're targeting the lead leg, if someone is targeting your lead leg and you're not going to them, they have to come to you, which means that you've got a good chance to get them on the counter. So if you watch Amanda Nunes knocking out Holly Holm, if you watch Israel Adesanya dealing with Robert Whittaker's side kicks to the lead leg, they retract the lead leg, and then I think Nunes kicks with the rear leg, but Adesanya kicks with the same leg, and they both go for high kicks. Because you don't get many free shots at high kicks, and when a guy is throwing a really hard low kick, and is on one leg and flying in towards you and has missed, that's always a good chance to throw the high kick. And if you don't knock him out, which is there's not a great chance you knock him out. I mean, Holly Holm got knocked out by Nunes in this way, but if you don't knock him out, you've at least got them worrying about that. But I bring all this up because there was an amazing moment in Rivera versus... there's several amazing moments in Rivera versus Munhoz where they both throw the calf kick to the opponent's standing leg as they take the opponent's calf kick. It's just brilliant. It's like currently... it might not be now, but recently the Mortal Kombat meta has evolved to the point where people just pick Shiva, the Lady Goro, as you might know her, and do the Shiva stomp, which takes her off screen and then drops her on wherever the opponent's standing, which is a bullshit move. But it's been in all the games, and they've managed to balance it out in a lot of them. But they didn't in this one, and some guy got booted from a tournament for... who makes that game? Fuck. Can't remember who makes the game, but his username was like, why would that studio do this? And he just spammed the Shiva stomp to make a point. But anyway, yes, tons of ways to deal with the calf kick. Number one being, don't just keep putting your foot in the same spot at the same tempo all the time. Make the opponent think that it's good, that you're stepping in, and then don't. There's no one in MMA who is comfortable to just keep swinging and missing. It makes you feel silly, and you feel out of position. It's the same reason that feinting like the jab against good counterpunchers works. Because think of someone like Mark Hunt, paralyzed by Stipe Miocic's shoulder feints, because once you've swung at air a couple of times, one, you look silly, and no one likes looking silly. Two, it's tiring. If you're loading up and throwing, it's tiring, and you put yourself in worse position afterwards. If you throw a big counterpunch and miss, and then the guy comes in with a good one too, you're fucked. Anyway, what else was on this card? Fucking rubbish. That's what else was. Alex Caceres versus Kevin Cream was just like the, not fight of the night, but fight that encapsulated the night for me. Kevin Cream just running into takedowns, doesn't ever succeed on one. Alex Caceres striking freely but doing no damage. And then Caceres, when the takedowns did happen, it was when Caceres tried to knee from like a collar tie and fell over. I think it looked good trying to, stopping the takedowns, but generally it was bad MMA. And then Kevin Cream was like he was getting back body lock and pulling Caceres on top of him. And then Caceres would just when you do stuff like that, guys tend to use like a leg drag or try and grapevine the back of the knee so that you've got like a butterfly hook on the back of the knee so the opponent can't just turn over and face you. But Caceres was able to just hip heist over and face him. It was a very weird fight. But yes, all in all, not a great event. And I was like, how am I going to get content out of this? And then I remembered, UFC 259's coming up this week, and that's fucking banging. So what I've got at the moment is I'm working on a big Dustin Poirier Advanced Striking 2.0, and I have been for a few weeks now, for the Patreon boys. But I think I'm going to put that off just a few days and drop something on Izzy versus Jan, or maybe Jan spelt the other way versus Aljo. But no, I think Izzy versus Jan is probably more important, and then we'll talk about both on the podcast, but probably Aljo versus Jan at more length. But anyway, tons of good fights on that card. You got Dominic Cruz on the undercard. That's how many good fights there are on that card. I mean, even if you don't give a shit about women's featherweight, which is literally everyone, that is a banging card. So anyway, if you want to read the extra shit, the tactical guides, get the extra episodes, all that stuff, support the podcast, join the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, and definitely do check this week because there'll be stuff coming, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Perfectly synchronized calf kicks bless.